Welcome back to my channel. It's Chelsea, where we talk about all things glam and all things girly. I'm a beauty enthusiast and consultant who loves to talk about everything dealing with beauty and makeup, and today we got a nice little showdown for you. So, Artist Couture Supreme Mauves palette, and when I saw this palette, I knew I wanted to compare it to the Patrick Ta Major Dimensions 2 Rose palette. So we will be seeing how I create both of these eye looks and sharing with you my thoughts of the comparisons and if this Supreme Nudes palette is worth your buy, because I've already done a review on the Patrick Ta palette. So if you've seen that, you already know my thoughts on that. But let's see how this Artist Couture plays out. Thank you so much for spending some time with me today. I truly do appreciate it, and let's get right into this video. So the Artist Couture Supreme Nudes palette does retail for $45. You can pick this up from Sephora, and I love the original Artist Supreme's Nudes palette, the first palette that he came out. I thought that one was beautiful, and I wore that one out. So I was very excited about this one. So it says that this is a must-have eyeshadow and pressed pigment palette made up of 12 richly pigmented modern mauve shades in 3 different finishes to create endless looks. It says redefine the concept of mauves with this lavish new palette that's sure to reign supreme. This palette features 7 buttery mattes, 2 sparkling duochrome shadows, and 3 multi-dimensional high pearl finishes in an array of mauve, berry, and neutral tones. I'm going to quickly swatch all of the shades in this mauve palette, and then we'll get into the demonstration. Overexposed, Kinky, and Royale. And just so you know, I am swatching the shadows this way, just so you know. Risque, Lust, and Sex Appeal. Okay with the names. And I'm gonna swatch Risque again because I just saw that you all pretty much didn't see that at all. Provocative, Audacious, Seductress. And then we have Stripped Down, Obscene, and Prestige. So these are all the swatches of the shades in the Supreme Mauves palette. Okay, so getting into these eye looks. So I started off with this shade Exposed from the Supreme Mauves palette. Used this to basically be a brow bone highlight. I felt that this shadow blended really nicely. I was able to build it up to where I felt like I could see it as a brow bone highlight. And I was very happy about that, because looking at shades like that, a lot of times I go, okay, this is not gonna show up against my complexion. It'll just be like a nice blending shade. Then in the Patrick Ta palette, I went in with the lightest shade right here and did the same on the other side. Once again, not really showing up as an actual shade really against my complexion, but I do think we can see a nice little brow bone highlight, matte brow bone highlight there. This shade Overexposed blended really nicely, didn't feel chalky or anything. And even with my swatch, even though the swatch didn't swatch as well, I feel like it did blend pretty nicely and comfortably on the eye. So then after that, I went in with this shade called Lust, which is right here in the palette. And once again, just starting to build up the transition area. I felt like this shade blended really nicely. And looking at the shade swatched on my hand, on my arm, once again, not swatching really great at all, but blending really nicely on the eye. And then I went in with this shade from the Patrick Ta palette and blended that. Of course, if you've already seen that review, if you haven't, I'll tell you, these shadows in the Patrick Ta palette are amazing, beautiful. I noticed right off the back too that the Patrick Ta palette came off with more pigmentation than the Supreme Mauves palette. So when I had to, whereas when I was using the Supreme Mauves palette, I'm blending up the shade, Patrick Ta came pretty much right out of the gate being full on pigmented. So then after the shade Lust, I went in with the shade Audacious and started to really work that into the crease and build it up. And I will say that the shades the matte shades from the Supreme Mauves palette are not nearly as buttery. They are not nearly as buttery at all. I do find some inconsistency with the matte shades. So the first two matte shades that I used, even touching them, they felt pretty smooth in my, or on my finger, blended really nicely on the eye. When I got to Audacious, like, I felt like I had to kind of, it blended nicely, but I felt like it just wasn't as smooth. And then even just touching that matte shade, it wasn't, or doesn't feel as smooth and creamy. I went in with this shade from the Patrick Ta palette. This one, like, was so pigmented. I was like, whoa, Sally, whoa. But it was able to blend out effortlessly. But that's when I really saw the difference in pigmentation and the intensity of pigmentation between the Artist Couture palette and the Patrick Ta palette. So then lastly, I went in with the shade called Prestige to smoke out the lower lash line and also to define the upper lid. This shade legit, I hate to say it, but literally feels like chalk on my finger. Like, it is so rough, it's so textured. However, we really do get great pigmentation from it in terms of swatching, and I felt like I had no issue with it skipping on the eye. Now, I did use it in a small amount, in a small area, so I would say, especially with how it feels, I would say with that shade, definitely work in small amounts. Don't apply a big amount of the shadow on your eye and then try to blend it from there, because I don't think it's gonna blend well. I think you need to go in small amounts, pack it on, blend it, pack it on, blend it. Use a nice fluffy brush to maybe help to blend out the edges if you're gonna be using this shadow like all across the lid, because it is quite chalky. But from what I did today, I had no problem with it. And like I said, that is the method of application I would use moving forward. And then from the Patrick Ta palette, I went in with this shade here. And it's also when we get to these two shades that we see the differences of the Supreme Mauves leaning more mauve and the Patrick Ta palette leaning more pinky rose. Because when we get into those deeper shades, you see the differences as well. This eye definitely on the lower lash line looks more pinky, rosy. This definitely is pulling more like a brown plum type of shade. So in terms of shimmers, so I wanted to use as many shimmers as I could. So went in with this first shade right here, and I believe this is one of the duochromes. Yes, it is one of the duochromes. And if you wanted to see it swatch, it's this shade right here. So went in first with a brush to try to see how does this pick up shadows, and I'm just looking at the texture and like rubbing my brush in it. I was like, this is gonna be a shade that I'm gonna need to use my finger, and I was right. Tried to use a brush, wasn't really getting too much pigmentation, so went in with my finger, and that's when I was able to build up more pigmentation with that shade. And then from the Patrick Ta palette, I went in with this shade right here, which these shades from Patrick Ta, they tend to work better with the finger too. You can get some, decent pigmentation on a brush, but these really do work well or best with the finger as well, because I would say these three shades right here from Patrick Ta are gonna be more like shimmer toppers. These two shimmer shades from Patrick Ta, you can work pretty good with a brush. But I did wanna point that out, that for both palettes, when it comes to the shimmers, finger is best, or like a very dense brush. Like I used the Rephr 02 brush to pack on the shimmer for both eyes, and it picked it up really nicely because it's very dense. The hairs are short, so it can really grasp the pigmentation and apply it to the eye. For the Patrick Ta side, I went in with this shade right here, and just looking at it on the eye, you can see, number one, it's not going to be completely like opaque and like very dense in its base. So I used my finger to get the most amount of pigmentation that I could with that shade. And then for the inner portion of the upper lid, I went in with this shade from the Supreme Mauves palette. This one, if I didn't have nails, I could have used my finger more. So I started with my finger, and then I was like, these nails are in the way. So I went in with the brush, really got great pigmentation from that shade too, and I really love it. I think this is also this is the second duochrome shade that's in the palette. And this is what it looks like swatched on the arm. Really nice, and this one definitely comes with a nice kind of dense base in terms of the opacity of the shade. And then from Patrick Ta, I went in with this shade right here, and use the brush, and I think we got pretty good pigmentation as well. But like I said, the Patrick Ta shimmers are definitely going to be like more like shimmer toppers. They're not as like opaque in their base. This one shade is definitely more opaque in its base, and I did use that shade right here on the lower lash line, and then I went in with this shade here for the lower lash line, and this one seems very opaque as well. I really do like it. And just to correct myself, this is the second duochrome shade, and then this is that opaque shade that I put on the lower lash line. I just wanted to let you all know. And I did add another swatch so you could see the shade a little bit more. So, and that was it. That was eye looks, yes. So, getting into my final thoughts, because I do have some final thoughts. So, all in all, I really do like this Artist Couture Supreme Mauve shades. And I think that in terms of like the shimmers, I will say I was not expecting the shimmers to be as shimmer toppery like they are. Looking at the Artist Couture palette, I was just like, man, these shimmers are gonna pop. They're gonna be so beautiful. And like, I really felt that they were gonna be much more opaque than what they are. Like this shade right here, I'm so excited to use this. I didn't use it on the eyes for these looks today, but just swatching it, I'm like, this is more of like a glitter shimmer topper. So for me, I'm probably gonna need to spray my brush to really get some opacity with it. It is quite textured. So this is what it looks like on my finger. And if I were to like swatch it on the back of my hand, once again, we're still not getting as much oomph from it as I think we could. And I feel like this shade is so pretty. But even like building this up on the back of my hand, we're still not getting a lot from this particular shade. So if you're comparing this Supreme Mauves to like the Supreme Nudes, I could see you being a little disappointed because the shimmers in the Supreme Nudes, let me go ahead and get that one. So here is the Supreme Nudes, right? Such an OG. I need to take this out and love on it more. But just to do a quick swatch of the shimmers, like just ever so slightly. So here are the shimmers in the Supreme Nudes, and I'm just gonna quickly, one swatch of it, and look at that. We've got much more pigmentation. They're very buttery and smooth and not textured at all. And I am here for textured eyeshadows. I just feel like if they're gonna be textured, make them opaque or make the shimmer topper formula very smooth and buttery. And also make it to where, if possible, we're not having to really work to get the pigmentation on the eye. And then the mattes in the Supreme Nudes, also very buttery and smooth. So I think I like this palette. I will reach for it, but I just know I gotta put some elbow grease in this particular palette. Like I said, especially with these two mattes here, they're quite chalky, okay? So work in small amounts, build it up, and I think you will very much enjoy the intensity of them because the mattes do build up, and I was very happy about that. And I also love the color scheme. I feel like we can get a little more diversity of looks in terms of with the matte shades in this palette than we can with the matte shades in the Patrick Ta palette. That was something that I felt, I noticed that I could get more diverse looks in the matte shades in this Supreme Mauves palette. In terms of just butteriness and smoothness and formulation, the mattes are definitely better in the Patrick Ta palette. And in terms of the shimmers, I would say the shimmers are better in the Patrick Ta palette just because the formulation is better. So even though, like I said, we're working with shimmer toppers here, even this shade right here, like you see right here, it's not the most opaque, but the formulation is smoother. It's a little more cohesive. And so even if you are, wanting more pigmentation, you're gonna get that pigmentation because the formula is more cohesive versus with like this shade that I showed you, the formula is not as cohesive, but the formula is more cohesive with these shades right here. So if you just work and build them up, I think you can get the intensity that you want. However, if you're not somebody that wants to do that, then I would say this might not be the one for you. If you don't really wanna, kind of work with the palette. but I think I like it. I will work with it. But I will say, if you're not that type of person who wants to work with an eyeshadow palette, then I would not recommend this one for you. Because you are going to have to put a little bit of elbow grease in it. Yeah, it's just, I mean, the shimmers in this Supreme Mauves palette are just not hitting like I thought they would. And the mattes are just not as smooth as they could be. So I most definitely recommend the Patrick Ta palette. I think this one is beautiful. You also get some cream base shades, so you can use that for your eye looks as well. And this is just beautiful. I'll definitely link my review so you can see more detailed looks with this palette. But the Supreme Mauves, I mean, it is not what I thought it would be. So I'm a little disappointed, just, you know, a little disappointed. But I do think this is a palette that you can make work. So I'm putting that out there. Would I recommend it? Like I said, if you don't mind working with the shadows and, you know, maybe adding a little bit more elbow grease for particular looks that you want, I would recommend it. However, if you don't want to do that, I wouldn't recommend it. I'm going to take some time and go through my collection, and I can recommend you some other eyeshadow palettes that have this similar color story. And maybe I'll do a separate video for that. Let me know if you would be interested in that type of video, because then we can delve a little deeper and I can show you different palettes, different shades, and, you know, give you something else to work with. So let me know your thoughts down below. Let me know what you think of the eye looks. How do you like them? I love both of the eye looks. I think they both came out pretty beautiful. So in terms of how it all came together nicely, but we just had to, you know, put a little work in this little eye look over here. So let me know your thoughts down below. What do you think of either palette? Which eye look do you like better? Patrick Ta, Supreme Mauves? I want to hear it all in the comment section below. And if you've made it to this point in the video and you have yet to subscribe to my channel, I would love for you to consider subscribing and joining the Glam Girl Squad. And guys, that is it. Thank you so much for watching, and I really hope to see you in my very next video. Bye, guys.